Rome, 2014. Two men walk through the corridors of the Vatican. Both wear the red cassocks of cardinals. Both hold positions of immense power in the Catholic Church. And both have just discovered something that would change their lives forever. What they saw in the Vatican's secret archives was worse than they imagined. Much worse. And when they decided to speak, they paid the highest price a prince of the church can pay. One of them was sent to prison on charges that the highest court in his country would deem false. The other was excommunicated, expelled from the very institution he served for 5 decades. One died under circumstances many consider suspicious. The other lives in exile, isolated from the world. Their names? Cardinal George Pell, from Australia. And Cardinal Carlo Maria Viganò, from Italy. 2 men. 2 continents. One impossible mission: expose corruption at the heart of the Catholic Church. Over the next 30 minutes, you will discover the 5 explosive truths these 2 cardinals revealed. Truths so disturbing that powerful people did everything to silence them. Truths based on real documents, verified testimonies, and incontestable facts. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented history. And it's far more shocking than you imagine. Prepare yourself. Because what you're about to hear will completely change the way you see the oldest and most powerful institution in the world. Truth number 1, the Vatican was bleeding millions in systematic fraud. Cardinal George Pell arrives in Rome from Australia. Pope Francis had just appointed him to a position that had never existed before, prefect of the Secretariat for the Economy of the Vatican. In other words, Pell would be the chief financial officer of the Catholic Church. The mission was clear: find out where the money was going. Pell, a straightforward Australian with no patience for nonsense, began doing what no one had done in centuries: audit the Vatican's finances. What he found shocked him. Hundreds of hidden bank accounts. Millions of euros disappeared. Fraudulent contracts. Phantom payments. In his first months, Pell discovered that the Vatican was losing approximately $50 million per year in waste, fraud, and mismanagement. 50 million. Every year. Simply vanishing. He discovered that different Vatican departments maintained their own secret bank accounts. No one knew how much money the church actually had. It was absolute financial chaos. Or worse, it was intentional. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Carlo Maria Viganò had made similar discoveries years earlier. Between 2009 and 2011, as Secretary General of the Governorate, Viganò had documented massive overcharging in contracts. Companies charging 3 times the market price for basic services. Suppliers that didn't exist. Payments to accounts in tax havens. Viganò prepared detailed reports. Sent everything to Pope Benedict XVI. Identified those responsible. Expected action. Instead, he was exiled to Washington as Apostolic Nuncio. Removed. Silenced. His discoveries filed away and forgotten. But now, 3 years later, another cardinal was discovering the same rot. And this time, he had the direct support of Pope Francis. Or so he thought. Pell began implementing reforms. Centralized bank accounts. Demanded transparency. Fired incompetent or corrupt people. And immediately, resistance began. Vatican departments refused to cooperate. Powerful cardinals blocked his initiatives. Documents mysteriously disappeared. Pell realized he wasn't fighting incompetence. He was fighting a system designed to steal. The first truth was exposed: the Vatican didn't have a corruption problem. It was a system of corruption disguised as a church. Truth number 2, there is a Vatican mafia that controls money and power. When Pell and Viganò began investigating, both discovered something Italian journalists had whispered about for decades: there is a network of power within the Vatican that operates like a criminal organization. They call it different names. The St. Gallen Mafia. The Lavender Mafia. The Corrupt Curia. But the result is the same: a group of cardinals, bishops, bankers, and businessmen who control the flows of money, power, and information within the Church. Viganò was the first to name names publicly. In his explosive letters from 2018 onwards, he identified specific cardinals who, according to him, were part of this network. He alleged that this group manipulated papal conclaves, covered up abuse scandals, and diverted millions in funds. Pell discovered the same network, but from the financial side. He identified that certain Vatican departments operated as independent fiefdoms. The Vatican Bank, officially called the Institute for the Works of Religion, had a documented history of money laundering, connections to the Italian mafia, and accounts of dictators. In 2013, shortly before Pell arrived, the president of the Vatican Bank resigned after a scandal involving €26 million blocked on suspicion of money laundering. Pell inherited this chaos. But what both cardinals discovered was even more sinister. This network didn't just steal money. It used that money as power. To buy silence. For blackmail. To control appointments. To cover up crimes. Pell testified in 2016 before the Australian Royal Commission on Sexual Abuse. He admitted the Church had systematically covered up abuse for decades. But what he couldn't say publicly, for legal protection, was how the diverted money was used to pay victims into silence, transfer predator priests, and protect the powerful. Viganò was more direct. In 2018, he published an 11-page letter specifically accusing Cardinal Theodore McCarrick of serial abuse, and alleging that Pope Francis and other cardinals had known about it for years but did nothing. More, that McCarrick was protected because he was part of the power network. McCarrick was eventually expelled from the clergy in 2019. Viganò was right. But the price he paid for speaking was devastating. The second truth was exposed. It wasn't just financial corruption. It was a power conspiracy that used money, secrets, and fear to maintain absolute control. Truth number 3, cardinals who expose the truth are systematically destroyed. This is where the story gets truly dark. George Pell was making real progress in his reforms. Between 2014 and 2017, he managed to significantly reduce the Vatican's deficit. He was gaining transparency. He was closing corruption loopholes. And then, in 2017, sexual abuse allegations surfaced against him in Australia. Allegations that he had abused 2 choirboys in 1996, 20 years earlier. Pell vehemently denied it. He voluntarily returned to Australia to face the charges. In 2018, he was convicted. In 2019, sentenced to 6 years in prison. He spent 404 days behind bars. But in April 2020, the Australian High Court unanimously overturned his conviction. 7 judges, unanimous decision. They concluded that the allegations were impossible to have occurred as described. That the original jury had not adequately considered the evidence. That Pell was innocent. 404 days in prison. Reputation destroyed. Health debilitated. And why? Many, including Pell himself, believed the charges were strategically timed. Surfacing precisely when his financial reforms were most effective. When he was closest to exposing who really controlled the Vatican's money. During his time in prison, Pell kept a diary. Published posthumously, it revealed his belief that forces within the Vatican wanted him removed. That he had become too dangerous. Viganò met a different but equally devastating fate. After his 2018 denunciations, he was progressively marginalized. Attacked not for the accusations he made, but for his motivations. Called a conspirator. A coup plotter. A madman. He became radicalized, embracing increasingly extreme theories. But he also did something remarkable. He continued denouncing. Naming names. Publishing documents. And in July 2024, he was officially excommunicated for schism. The cardinal who exposed McCarrick, who revealed financial corruption, who warned about power networks, was expelled from the Church. While many of those he accused remain in positions of power. The third truth was exposed: the system doesn't reform itself. It destroys those who try to reform it. Truth number 4, the London property scandal proved they were right. If you still doubt that Pell and Viganò were right, consider what happened after Pell was forced to leave Rome in 2017 to face trial. With Pell gone, reforms stopped. Oversight loosened. And in 2018, a massive scandal exploded. The Vatican had invested hundreds of millions of euros in a luxury real estate venture in London. And the money simply disappeared. 200 million euros. Spent purchasing a building in Chelsea, London. But the deal was riddled with fraud. Intermediaries received giant commissions. The building was purchased at an inflated value. Fraudulent investors took advantage. The Vatican's Secretariat of State, theoretically overseen by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, was at the center of the scandal. Exactly the type of department Pell had tried to reform and make transparent. In 2021, 10 people went on trial in the Vatican, including a cardinal, Angelo Becciu, accused of embezzlement and abuse of power. It was the first time in modern history that a cardinal faced a Vatican criminal court. Becciu was convicted in 2023 to 5.5 years in prison. Others were convicted as well. The scandal confirmed everything Pell had warned about. Without rigorous oversight, the Vatican bled money to systematic fraud. And here's the disturbing detail: Becciu was one of Pell's main opponents within the Vatican. He had repeatedly blocked his reforms. He argued that Pell was exceeding his authority. Now we know why. Becciu was overseeing, or at minimum allowing, the same types of fraud that Pell was trying to eliminate. Viganò had specifically named Becciu in his letters as part of the corrupt network. At the time, he was ridiculed. Now, Becciu is a convicted criminal. The fourth truth was exposed: everything Pell and Viganò denounced was happening. And it got worse when they were silenced. Truth number 5, Pell's death and Viganò's exile are warnings to others. January 10, 2023. Cardinal George Pell dies suddenly in Rome at 81 years old. Official cause: complications from hip surgery. But the circumstances raised questions. Pell was in Rome to participate in important meetings. He had just published an anonymous memorandum criticizing the current direction of the papacy. He was planning to write his complete memoirs, including what he really saw in the Vatican. And then, he died. Suddenly. Conspiracy theories exploded online. People alleged that Pell was permanently silenced. That he knew too much. That he was about to reveal more secrets. These are just theories. There's no evidence of crime. But the symbolism is undeniable. The man who tried to clean up the Vatican died before he could tell the whole story. Viganò, on the other hand, remains alive. But completely isolated. Excommunicated. Without church. Without community. At 83 years old, he lives in an undisclosed location, communicating only through occasional letters published online. He has become a pariah. His most recent denunciations are increasingly ignored, even when he makes serious allegations. He lost credibility by embracing extreme conspiracy theories about globalism, vaccines, and the New World Order. But here's the question: was this radicalization the natural result of an isolated and embittered man? Or was it the objective? To transform him into such a controversial figure that no one would take his original allegations seriously? Both cardinals paid devastating prices. Pell lost his freedom, reputation, and eventually his life without being able to tell everything he knew. Viganò lost his community, credibility, and is fated to die as a forgotten footnote. And the message to other potential whistleblowers is crystal clear: this is what happens when you speak. You will be destroyed. One way or another. The fifth and most frightening truth was exposed: the system doesn't just punish those who reveal its secrets. It uses them as examples. As warnings. As proof that silence is survival. Conclusion: the legacy of two cardinals. So, what did we learn from the revelations of Cardinals Pell and Viganò? We learned that corruption in the Vatican is not myth or exaggeration. It's real, documented, and systematic. We learned that there is indeed a power network that protects its interests above the Church's mission. We learn that whistleblowers, no matter how powerful, are systematically destroyed. But we also learn something more important, that truth, once revealed, cannot be completely buried. Because of Pell, the Vatican was forced to implement real financial reforms. A cardinal was for the first time criminally convicted for fraud. Transparency increased, even if gradually. Because of Viganò, McCarrick was expelled from the clergy. Conversations about cover-up networks became mainstream. Uncomfortable questions were forced into public light. Both paid terrible prices. But their revelations left permanent marks. George Pell died knowing his innocence was proven. That his reforms, even incomplete, made a difference. That he fought the good fight. Carlo Maria Viganò lives knowing he was right about McCarrick. That his initial denunciations about financial corruption were true. That he chose truth over career. Were they perfect? No. Pell had blind spots about systematic sexual abuse in the Australian church. Viganò descended into conspiracy theories that undermined his credibility. But were they courageous? Absolutely. They chose to denounce even knowing the price. They risked everything because they believed the institution they loved deserved better. And they left us with a final question: how many other cardinals, bishops, and priests know similar truths but choose silence? How many secrets still await in the Vatican shadows? And when, if ever, will the Church finally be transparent about its past and present? The 5 truths Pell and Viganò revealed are just the surface. They are the truths they managed to expose before being silenced. How many others remain buried? That's the question that haunts. And that should remind us, institutions, no matter how sacred, are made of people. And where there are people with power, there is temptation. And where there is temptation without accountability, there is corruption. Pell and Viganò reminded us of this. They paid dearly for the lesson. It's up to us to decide if we'll listen to it. Truth, as we said at the beginning, once revealed, does not return to darkness. It only waits. Patient. Until we have the courage to see it completely. George Pell and Carlo Maria Viganò had that courage. The question is, do we?